Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So the Power Cosmic season is coming to an end. New season starts tomorrow night. Really looking forward to it. Got some cool theory crafting decks coming tomorrow for Zabu, and of course we'll be streaming it once it goes live and getting up some videos on YouTube shortly afterwards. But before the season ends, I wanted to take a look and talk about what I think are the kind of 5 standout decks, in my opinion, from the Power Cosmic season. Figured it'd be kind of neat to do this towards the end of every season, talk about the decks that I think were super impactful this season, and it'll kind of serve as a kind of timestamp of when these decks were super strong, and we can kind of look back on it later on to see how things change. If the decks stay strong, if they get stronger due to new cards, if other new stuff pushes them down a bit. I think it'll be neat as kind of a potential meta history type of thing. So we're going to take a look at top 5 decks, in my opinion, of the Power Cosmic season. Starting out, we have Negative Surfer. So this is a deck I've featured a few different builds of, but after a bunch of playing and testing around with it, this is the version that I think is best. Now, unfortunately, this version of the deck very much does lean on the 1 pool 5 card in it. Fast is a significant power boost to the deck because not only does it make you playing Mr. Negative a bit better, since you can get a not negative Mr. Negative in terms of power, but it also makes the deck a lot better when you don't draw Mr. Negative, which is probably the bigger upside. As before, Negative is kind of a high roll deck where it's great if you get Negative, but the deck kind of fumbles a bit if you don't. I think Bast really helped round that out, as Bast is a benefit for almost every single card in the deck, barring Sera, where it's a slight power decrease. I just think this is the best version of the deck if you want to go with a negative shell. The Surfer was a very, very powerful addition to Negative. All the cards here, especially the 3-drops, just do a whole ton for their power. I really appreciate the Negative swap. So if you do have access to Bast and you enjoy the type of gameplay that Mr. Negative enables, this is a really solid choice. And if you are a big Mr. Negative fan, I definitely would be considering saving up for Bast as that first pool 5 from your token shop. Next up, we have Death Wave, or Disrupt Wave as I like calling this version. So this deck got a huge boost from the addition of She-Hulk, and it has had a pretty tremendous impact on the metagame. I would say this deck is actually a big reason why the Leech Leader stuff, which we'll also be featuring here, became so popular. So this version of the deck, pretty standard Death Wave shell, but they got a pretty big boost from She-Hulk being added to the game, as now the combo with Wave on the final turn, you just wave and pass on turn 5, usually locking your opponent to just playing 1 card, and if you draw it, you will be able to play She-Hulk and Death, as well as another card. Usually we are playing Arrow or Leader if we have them available. Really just super duper powerful deck. The downside, though, is a lot of its power is based on the final turn. So definitely a deck that's counterable, but it gained a lot this season just from the addition of She-Hulk, as its kind of nut draw is quite a bit more powerful than Death Wave used to be previously, and it's definitely a deck that has to be respected in the current meta. It is possible that this gets a little better / a little worse depending on how Leader gets adjusted. I do think this card is going to be adjusted in the next balance update, so it's possible you end up replacing Leader with a different 6-drop. However, that's totally fine, because even if Leader does take a hit, that might be better for this deck than worse, because you can just replace Leader in the deck, and if less people are running Leader, the kind of big combo you can do for the final turn with Wave and Death and She-Hulk gets quite a bit better because your opponent can't easily copy it. Next up, we have a deck that has certainly become infamous this season, and that is Sera's Leech Leader deck. This deck originally spawned when Lamentis 1 was the hot location, as everyone was running Death, and Leech just kind of turns Death off. Makes Death an unplayable card, and then you finish out with Leader, so the idea is you're gaining some tempo in the early game with our good cheap cards in the 1, 2, 3 cost spot. Then we have some tech cards on the top end, like Leech, Leader, and Shang-Chi to kind of swing the game in our favor. Arrow can also take opponents by surprise, as can Magneto, and White Queen for extra information and a potential alternative win con. This deck has been really, really good this season. A major part of that is a lot of the decks that are powerful and prominent in the meta really want to be doing a lot of big stuff on the final turn, whether that is the Death Wave deck like we just saw, or a bunch of these Surfer lists. A lot of decks are kind of holding their big final plays till the end of the game, and Leech Leader certainly punishes that pretty heavily. There is another version of this list, which is pretty much card for card the same. However, it swaps out the Shang-Chi and Leech spots for Shuri and Vision. I do think that list is also a very good option if you have Shuri, but this one is probably a bit more budget friendly as it only uses up to pool 3 cards. I do think this deck is going to take quite a hit if Leader sees an adjustment, but for the time being, it is definitely a very strong part of the metagame. Next up, we have a Shuri list. So there are a lot of different ways you can build Shuri, but this is the one I was most impressed with, as it has a pretty good variety of ways to win with and without the card. So this is a 0 list, but it's not going all in on the 0. We just have a handful of 0 targets, and the list actually works super well even if we don't draw 0. So the idea is we have a bunch of stuff that benefits from our Shuri here. Namely, a lot of it is Black Panther, Arrow, Red Skull, Maximus, and America Chavez. Those are most of the time what we're going to try and be hitting with the Shuri. We have Taskmaster to copy whatever big thing we make with the Shuri. Also plays around Leader well. Zola plays around Leader well as well. Can also enable the Black Panther combo, even though it's a little telegraphed. Sometimes it's just good enough to win games. On top of that, we have a pretty good early game here. Sunspot, because we'll often be floating some mana in the early game. 0 to get rid of negative effects from things like Maximus or our Red Skull. Armor and Cosmo to protect our big stuff from things like Shang-Chi and shut down the opponent's plans. And then we just have good big cards with the Black Panther, Arrow, and Red Skull, and Chavez for that deck consistency, though sometimes we will just get a 18 power Chavez off of Shuri. So I really like this version. You do not need Black Panther for this deck to be good. There are a lot of different versions of the deck going around. I do think non-Panther shells are also pretty good, like in the different version of the Leech Leader deck, the one that had Shuri. I think Vision is a very, very strong card in Shuri. So if you want to go a little bit of a different direction with this, you could include some more potential targets for 0, as well as a Vision in this list in place of things like the Black Panther Aram Zola combo. Really comes down kind of to personal preference, but I think either way, you can't really go wrong with a Shuri deck like this right now. Moving on to our final deck showcase here, and that is going to be for Sera. Now we are going to cheat a little bit here and show off 2 Sera decks, because I think there are 2 equally valid options depending on your preference and what cards you have accessible. But Sera was definitely a power player during the Silver Surfer season. So let's take a look at the decks we have for her. The first one here is a teched out Sera deck. Now me personally, this is the version I prefer. I think there are 2 very valid ways of playing Sera, the tech version like we see here, and a Surfer version, which I'll put on screen in a minute. It really depends on the type of playstyle you like. I really like the kind of reactive, control-y playstyle, and I think this version of Sera really enables it well. We do have our powerful tech cards here in Shang-Chi, Enchantress, Killmonger, and Armor. You could consider adding Cosmo to something like this, but I found it really wasn't super necessary. The big thing, this plays just like a classic Sera list where we're just dunking a bunch of cards on the final turn. So we have a lot of 2-drops, which will only cost 1 here, that are good for tempo. Mysterio keeps the opponent guessing and has good synergy with stuff like Bishop, as does Sera, since we're going to be playing a lot of cards on the final turn. And our tech cards here get a lot better when we only have to pay 3 mana for them. Other than that, we just have good value strong cards here, like Maximus. Nova helps us spread some power across the board when we blow stuff up with Killmonger. It's a pretty straightforward list, but it's one I have had a lot of success with. And especially if you are new in Pool 3, you can get by with this list with some substitutions. You really only need Sera, as you can substitute Maximus and Mysterio for other decent 3 and 2 cost cards respectively. And this is one of the very popular builds of Sera Surfer. A lot of different ways you can build this deck. This one comes from KM Best, and it's a version I played quite a bit on stream and was very happy with. So you can definitely build this deck in a lot of different ways. But if your preference is to play a more Surfer-focused list with Sera, this is definitely not a bad call. Definitely a bit different than the tech version, as we're trying to do something very proactive on the final turn instead of being more reactive like with the tech list, but both definitely are very powerful decks and in my opinion should be pretty infinite viable. So there we have it. Those are my top decks for the Power Cosmic Silver Surfer season. I think this is a pretty fun thing that I'm going to try and do at the end of every season. Get a look at, what decks really were very popular and dominant in the metagame, and that I just generally had a good experience playing with and against. I'm super interested to know in the comments below what your experience was with this season. I know it was definitely a harder one to climb on ladder, and the Leech Leader stuff definitely soured it for some people, but hopefully we won't have to be dealing with that too much longer, and it has eased up since the peak of it towards the middle or later December. Haven't seen quite as much of it, but that's gonna wrap it up for our top decks of the Silver Surfer season. I'm excited to be messing around with some Zabu stuff. Again, we'll be having some theory crafting decks going up tomorrow that I think look really solid, and we will be going live over on Twitch with the new season as soon as it releases. So that is going to wrap it up for this video. If you enjoyed it, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.